Chapter 31. A trap is a trap is a trap. Dak prided himself on being smart, but it sure didn't seem as if being smart was enough to keep him from walking into traps every other day. He'd assumed they'd be up against a single undercover SQ agent, like the fake Mrs. Beeson. He'd assumed they'd have the advantage and that surprise would be on their side. He'd assumed wrong, but he was smart enough to know when they were beat. As much as he wanted to fight, they didn't have a chance. Elsa knew it, too. She smiled an evil smile. "Hake, Stucky, take the darling Bowley boy to the cellar to wait with the other auction items," she said, voice dripping with contempt. She held up a finger and tapped it to her black lips. "On second thought, let's not give them the satisfaction of seeing the boy. Instead, take them all to the holding room while I alert my colleagues to the good news of the time traveler's arrival. Most of them have begun their journey here already, so it won't be long. Then we'll have tea and learn about all their little secrets." She laughed a sinister laugh. James looked scared. Dak tried to reassure him with a strained smile and a wink. "Just stick close to us, buddy," he whispered. "How are you jerks even here?" Sera asked as Hake grabbed her by the arms. "You attacked us in public. You should be in jail." Elsa clucked her tongue. "They were acting within the law in their pursuit of stolen property. Under the Fugitive Slave Act, it's all of you who are the criminals." Stucky took the satchel from Sera's belt, while Dak dropped his eyes to the ground. "Man, I really hate this time period," he mumbled. As one of the burly agents rough-armed him down the hallway, Rick glanced around, taking in whatever he could. The house was large, but there was hardly any furniture, which made all the rooms they passed look the same. Soon they reached a locked door. Rick could hear muffled sounds coming from the other side of it. One of Elsa's cronies pulled his set of keys from his belt and unlocked the door, and Rick and the others were dragged inside. What they saw shocked them. All along the walls of the unfurnished sitting room stood more than a dozen men and women. There were Quakers next to collared priests, Nanticoke Indians next to Pennsylvania Dutch. Their skin colors ranged from darkest dark to palest pale. It was a true American melting pot. Rick might have choked up at the sight of it if it weren't for one little thing. Each person in the room was shackled to the wall and gagged. Rick felt his eyes grow wide as he looked at all the faces in the room, and wider still when the time wardens pulled more shackles and gags from a tiny closet. "Come now," said Gamaliel. "Is it necessary to shackle the children?" Stucky rubbed his chest where Sera had kicked him only a day before. "It's necessary, but it's also a pleasure." There was nothing they could do. Rick watched as his friends were shackled to a bar that ran the length of the far wall. He was the last to be tied down. He hadn't missed the feeling of chains around his wrists, and the gag made it that much worse. The time wardens checked the shackles to make sure they were secure, and then they stalked back out of the room, closing the door behind them. Dak made a number of muffled noises as he appeared to recognize a few people, trying to shout out their names, but everything he said sounded like, "Woo! Harriet, who?" Rick felt powerless. He couldn't even console James, who was sniffling, trying to dry the tears from his eyes with his shoulder. It was then that he realized he had completely failed to accomplish his one goal, keeping Kissy and her Aunt Minty safe so they didn't get sold back into slavery. How could he have let go of the mission? He'd been arrogant again, and now look at them. Keziah and John were in a cellar somewhere about to be auctioned off, and Aunt Minty, well, he supposed she was in this room somewhere. He looked around at all the faces, and he was surprised that no one looked scared. They all wore expressions of extreme dignity. These were men and women who didn't break under pressure. They didn't give up when things got tough. They probably didn't even complain when things got tough. Rick felt pride building up inside of him. He thought of all the people throughout history, historians, but other people too, who had sacrificed everything to help others. The presence of so many heroes in one room gave him the motivation to keep going. He just had to get out of here, for James's sake, if for no other reason. There were 2 African-American women in the room, one who was rather tall and grand-looking, and another as short as Sera and somewhat plain. Rick thought back to the pictures from Grandma Phoebe's album and knew by sight that the shorter woman was Aunt Minty, Araminta Harriet Ross Tubman, who he just knew was destined for greatness if it weren't for the SQ. He caught the woman's eye, and she managed to make hers twinkle at him. He looked down at the floor, feeling awkward, and when he glanced at her again, she appeared to be asleep on her feet. Perhaps he'd imagined the twinkle. While Rick was lost in thought, and Dak was talking to himself in his newly created 4th language, English, Pig Latin, Spanish, one word, and now, mufflygag, Sera was kicking herself for not insisting they come up with a better plan before waltzing into an SQ stronghold. What were they going to do now, without anyone to help them, without a key to unlock these shackles? Wait a second, she thought. She looked up. She cried, though no one could understand her through the gag. Wildly, she kicked Dak. She said. What? Dak scrunched up his face, trying to understand her. Sera shook her head violently. Dak shook his puzzled face. What? He asked again. From your parents. Rick lifted his head, suddenly alert. He nodded at Sera and tried a different tactic. Poker. Dak tilted his head. Oh, he said. He nodded thoughtfully, and then he looked down in his pocket, which was nowhere within reach of his shackled hands. Sera soon realized the problem as well. Her shoulders slumped. There's no way it could be the right key anyway, she thought. What are the odds? But like she'd said earlier, parents seem to have a way of finding their children, and Dak's parents had always been there for him. Always. A clanging noise from between her and Dak startled her. She looked down at James, and then up at the now empty shackle that had once held his right arm. He shook his wrist, pulled the gag out of his mouth, and grinned. I did it, James said. He examined his freed wrist and frowned. Got a scrape. Oh, Sera said. Mijo? She bent as close to James as she could and tried to say, Can you take my gag out too, please? James seemed to have no trouble understanding her, and he stretched toward her as far as he could, just barely able to grasp Sera's gag while his left arm remained shackled overhead. He pulled her gag down, and Sera let out a relieved sigh. Thank you, she said in a whisper. We still need to be quiet, okay? James nodded. How did you do that? I made a stick with my hand and pulled it out, James said, matter-of-factly. This one is still stuck, though. He tugged on the chain to prove it. Sera smiled at him, then caught Dak's eye. Can you reach Dak's gag? She asked. Dak leaned toward James, and James lunged for the gag, straining against his shackle. Nope, James said, and then he looked at Sera. I can reach his pocket, though. Do you want me to get the key you were talking about? A burst of muffled chuckling rippled through the room, and Sera realized all the other prisoners had been watching intently. She grinned at the boy. Yes, please. Now that he had an audience, James beamed. He strained away from Sera and fished the key from Dak's pocket. Then he twirled around on his chain and strained the other way, trying to get more laughs. He held the key out to Sera, not quite able to reach her hand. And so he tossed it. Sera's grin turned to a gasp as the key bounced off her hand and clinked to the ground. Chapter 32. Free at last? James couldn't reach the floor. He bowed his head in shame. "It's okay," Sera said. She closed her eyes and tried to use her shoulder to wipe the sweat from her forehead. When she opened her eyes again, she realized that everyone in the room had frozen at the sound of the key hitting the floor. Now they watched her, encouragement and praise beaming from the crinkles around their glistening eyes. Sera glanced at Gamaliel, Dak, and Rick, who were all nodding their encouragement. She looked at James, whose bottom lip was trembling. "No worries, kid," she said. "We can do this." She placed her foot on the key and slid it to the wall. With that done, she took a deep breath and relaxed her muscles, and then she tensed up again and began the painstaking job of pushing a single key up a wall with her foot. "Glad I'm wearing Grunder's pants, or this could get awkward," she muttered. She had to move slowly. When her leg began to wobble and shake, Sera closed her eyes. Sweat dripped down her temples now. Her thigh muscles burned, but she held her position, gathering her inner strength. And then she began moving once again, centimeter by centimeter, until finally her thumb and forefinger grasped the key. She exhaled, and a murmur swept through the crowd. "So this is what it's like to be on a sports team when you're not the one messing up," she thought. But it wasn't over yet. There was no way to get the key in the lock with a hand that was shackled, so she pulled her chained arm toward her mouth instead and yanked her head and torso toward it, straining her neck so that she could clench the key in her teeth. With her mouth closed around the key, Sera tilted her head slowly, looking cross-eyed at the end of the key in order to line it up with the shackle's lock. She prayed that her hunch was right, knowing that all her efforts could be for nothing. The room was so silent she could hear mice skittering in the walls. Sera pushed the key into the lock and slid it as far as she could until it hit metal. She took a few breaths now that it was somewhat set in place, and then slowly she tilted her head the other way, eyes closed, listening, until she heard and felt a click. And the shackle opened, falling off her wrist and thudding against the wall. "Hee-hee," she said, one wrist free. She wiped the sweat from her forehead. She grabbed the key from the dangling shackle, freed her other wrist, and looked around the room and grinned. The prisoners were waving their hands in silent applause, and she held a finger to her lips. She shook out her hands to get the blood flowing again, and then she moved around the room, unlocking shackles like it was going out of style. Dak turned to Gamaliel while Sera made the rounds. "Is everyone here a you-know-what?" he asked. "Everyone present is a historian, in addition to being an abolitionist. Yes, there's no need for secrecy." Dak smirked. "Speaking of secrecy, aren't you guys supposed to be a secret organization? How did the SQ manage to track everyone down?" The short African-American woman answered as Sera unlocked her shackles. "It was the lanterns," she said. "They figured out what the lanterns meant. We led them straight to us." Rick stepped forward. "Aunt Minty, is that you?" he asked. She raised her chin. "Do you have my niece?" she said softly. "She's here in the cellar with her husband and baby. Your journey to help them to freedom may be delayed, but it is by no means canceled." Harriet Tubman smiled. "Your encouraging words will carry me." Gamaliel Bailey stepped forward, alongside a large, white-haired man wearing a suit. "Dak, Sera, Rick, this is Thomas Garrett. It's his house that Elsa has taken over as the hub for this entire plot." Thomas Garrett smiled.
"At your service," he said. "It is a pleasure to know you, although I would have liked it to be under better circumstances."
He roared in laughter and was subsequently shushed by a number of people in the room. "Thank you for your hospitality," Dak said, rubbing his wrists, a grin playing at the corner of his lips. "You have a lovely home, despite your lack of furniture."
"I apologize. I had to sell it all to pay a rather large fine for helping fugitives," the man said.
"Well, that's pretty cool of you," Dak said. He paused. Do you by chance know the way out of here?" Thomas Garrett chuckled.
"I believe I do. But we have one small hurdle remaining."
Rick heard the concern in Mr. Garrett's voice. "What is it?" he asked. The man pointed to the door.
"Elsa has locked us in, and there's no way to unlock that door from this side."
Chapter 33, in which the historians are reshackled, only not really. Dak and Sera looked at each other. "I guess this means we'll have to make them open it then," Dak said. "Unless you have any non-life-threatening, scientifically experimental ways to break this lock." "Come off it, Smith," Sera muttered. "It was one time. "Eyebrows," Dak reminded her. "You're kind of obsessed with your eyebrows. It's weird. Your face is weird." "Good grief," Rick said. "Could you do this later, please? We've got stuff to do." "He's right. Knock it off," Dak said. Sera rolled her eyes. "Whatever," she said, turning her attention back to the group. "Here's the plan. Everybody go back to your places and put your wrists back into the shackles. But for the love of mincemeat, don't close them. Just make it look like you've got them on. Gags loosely in your mouths, too. I know, spectacularly gross, but this is what we do for the good of society." Everyone but Rick and Dak went obediently to his or her place and slipped their gags and shackles on. "I really like this group of people," Sera muttered. She looked at James. "If fighting happens, you stay out of the way, okay? Just hide in that corner." She pointed, and then she addressed the group once more. "Good. Now, Elsa and her thugs took something of mine, something they won't know how to use. I'm going to pretend to offer her instructions in exchange for your freedom," she said. "Just play along like you're trapped there until I say the secret word, which means scream and attack. Once they're in this room, they'll be surrounded and we can overpower them. Capiche?" Rick leaned over and whispered, "What's the secret word?" "The secret word is—" Sera pondered it for a moment. 18-a-bibble, Dak said calmly. Sera looked at him and grinned. "Oh yeah, I forgot." She looked at the historians. 18-a-bibble. Got it? They all nodded. Rick shook his head. "Stupidest secret word ever," he muttered. "Yeah, well, at least nobody will say it by accident. Let's take our places and get ready for a fight." Just then, the door burst open. Elsa marched into the room, followed by an entire squad of SQ agents, including the fake Mrs. Beeson. All were armed, and all looked extremely dangerous. And in her hand, Elsa gripped the Infinity Ring. Chapter 34, 18-a-bibble. Sera, Dak, and Rick, the only ones not yet in their places, whirled around, and their eyes nearly popped out of their heads at the sight of the small army. "Great Wisconsin cheese hats! It's a war break after all," Dak said. His lip curled at the sight of fake Mrs. Beeson. Elsa looked furious. "You're too sneaky for your own good, but no matter. I don't think you're going anywhere without this." She lifted the ring into the air. Sera's heart sank to see the device in enemy hands, but she knew she could still fix this. She didn't dare spring the trap yet, though. The SQ had weapons. The historians had nothing. Not safe at all. "Get her," the woman said, icy calm. The Time Wardens grabbed Dak and Rick and pulled them aside. Sera glanced at Gamaliel and Harriet Tubman and Thomas Garrett, who looked poised to leap to her aid, and shook her head the slightest bit. No, 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 she chanted in her head. She wasn't giving up this easily. Wait for the signal. Then Stucky grabbed her by the arm, and she gave him a weary look. "Not you again. Easy on the duds," she muttered. Stucky pushed her forward to face the red-haired woman. "You've got me. I'll do whatever you say." Elsa narrowed her eyes, regarding Sera for a long, suspicious moment. "Can you tell Dog Breath to let go of me, please?" Sera asked. "Settle down, Dog Breath," Elsa muttered, turning the infinity ring in her hands with the utmost care. "How does it work?" she demanded. "Well," Sera said, jabbing her elbow into Stucky's gut and leaning forward, "you program it to the time and place you want to visit and press go, and then whenever you're ready to return here, just press go again and it'll bring you home automatically. That feature's kind of like the last button on your TV remote." She nodded knowingly. "It's slick." Elsa frowned at the strange words. "How do you tell it where to go?" Her tone was still harsh, but curious. "It's very precise, I'm afraid. I've spent 40 years learning how to use it." 40 years? Elsa spat out. "You're a child." Sera gave Elsa a strange look. "I beg your pardon? We all look like this at 65. She laughed. "I mean, I figured you must be at least 150 years old. Maybe 175, right?" Elsa's face burned. "No?" Sera's voice faltered. "Oh, my bad. I apologize. I'm sure you're, not bad-looking for this day and age. Can I get a woof-woof?" "Just show me how to use it. Now," Elsa barked. "I can't do it on command. You have to prepare. For one thing, there's the whole magnetic factor." She tapped her lips thoughtfully. What's that?" Sera looked at Rick. "Tell her," she said with a shrug. "The magnetic factor," Rick said, "is," he glanced sidelong at Sera, "a force field." "What does it do?" It pulls anything metal with you when you travel, which can really mess things up," he said. "It's why we don't bring coins with us," Sera continued. "We can't risk using the device at all until any coins or jewelry are stored in a separate room. Any loose metal at all." Rick looked at a warden's saber with disdain. "That includes weapons, but don't worry, you still got us outnumbered." Elsa narrowed her eyes. "All right," she said, her voice flat. She instructed her men to put their weapons, jewelry, and coins in the room next door. A few of them hesitated, but no one dared speak out against an order. Finally, Elsa turned back to Sera. "Show me how it works," she said, more forcefully this time, holding the infinity ring out, but gripping it tightly. Sera didn't take it. Instead, she tilted her head and shrugged. "Okay. Where do you want to go?" "I want to go to the future to see myself and everything I've accomplished." "So maybe 20 years into the future?" Sera asked with a sweet smile. "We need to be very precise." "Yes, 20 years from today." She didn't sound totally confident. "Great. Go ahead and program the longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates, and don't forget to consider the tilt and speed of the Earth, daylight savings time, leap years, and Groundhog Day." Sera clasped her hands behind her back. "Let me know if you have questions." Elsa stared at the infinity ring. Her lips formed a thin black line. She shoved the infinity ring back at Sera, poking her in the stomach with it, which Sera thought was a bit on the rude side. "You do it," Elsa demanded. "You're coming with me." Sera perked up. "Oh, why thank you. I'd love to." She took the infinity ring and started working at it, plugging in numbers, looking off into space, adding and subtracting, tilting her head, thinking about Groundhog Day. After a few minutes of constant tapping on the instrument, she gave the ring one last serious stare, and then she looked up. "All right," she said solemnly. "It's ready. Are you ready?" Elsa nodded, gripping one end of the ring. Sera flashed a glance at Dak and Rick and smiled. "Okay, great. We're going to December blah blah 18-a-bibble!" And just like that, they were gone. Chapter 35. A Very Short Trip. There was a moment of stunned silence. Even Dak was surprised. He hadn't expected Sera to actually warp away with Elsa. He could only imagine what the SQ agents must be thinking as they looked on with amazement at the spot where their leader had been. The moment passed quickly. James ran immediately to the corner and crouched into a ball while the historians sprang into action at the utterance of the secret word. Dak and Rick joined in the fight as Hake, or Stucky, Dak couldn't remember who was who, reacted to the surprise attack by turning and punching Thomas Garrett in the mouth. "Hey!" Dak yelled. "Don't be messing with my friend!" He screamed into the jerk's ear as Rick belted the guy in the gut. Amidst the yelling and screaming, kicking and karate chopping, Sera and Elsa reappeared in the exact spot they'd been standing in moments before. Elsa looked traumatized. She screamed, pulling away from Sera and throwing herself against the nearest wall. Sera followed, neatly slapping a dangling shackle around the woman's wrist before collapsing practically at Elsa's feet. "Are you okay?" Rick asked her as he followed her lead, shackling Hake to the wall with the help of Gamaliel Bailey. I just need a minute," she gasped. She took less than half a minute, though, before deciding that she needed to join the fray. Slipping the ring back into its satchel, she ran to the small closet she'd seen earlier and grabbed 2 spare shackle chains. She tossed one to Harriet Tubman, and together they took on several beastly time wardens, driving the men to the back of the room with their swinging chains. The wardens willingly closed the shackles around their own wrists with the promise that the women would put their chains down. "Sera!" Dak called out as he kicked a guy in the shin. "You guys look like you're acting out a scene from that online game you play. Dungeons and more dungeons. Chain fights, sword fights. Wow, just look at Miss Tubman go." Said Harriet. On the other side of the room, an SQ agent lifted a chair to slam down on Rick's head. "Hey!" hollered Thomas Garrett. "Don't be messing with my friend." He'd heard Dak say it moments before, and he really seemed to like the sound of it. He ran up behind the guy, grabbed the chair legs, lifted his foot, and kicked the guy square in the kidneys, sending him sprawling toward the next open spot on the wall, where Sera shackled him. The historian reached out a hand to help Rick up. "Nice one, Mr. Garrett," Rick said. "Thanks." "You're welcome, son. Who's next?" He turned to look at the sprawled bodies of the defeated, most of whom were now chained to the walls. Being sorely beaten, the remaining few SQ agents turned on their heels and fled. All was soon quiet. From the corner, James peeked through his fingers. "Can I come out yet?" Rick laughed and ran over to the boy, lifting him high in the air. The historians, nursing minor cuts and bruises, were beaming through their pain. Dak couldn't stop grinning, too. "Man," he said, "that was the best fight I've ever seen, and the war doesn't even start until 18-bibble," Rick said, shushing Dak with a look. Following their victory, Dak chattered excitedly with the historians, many of whom hadn't realized the kids were from the future until they'd seen what the Infinity Ring could do. Sera spoke quietly with a young woman named Susan, who wore a lovely brooch at her neck, but Rick stood aside with James and watched. He had a small smile on his face, but inside he was choking up a little. Maybe a lot. He caught Harriet Tubman's eye and walked over to her. "Let's go find your niece," he said. He put a hand on Thomas Garrett's sleeve. "Can you show us where the cellar is?" Together, they walked through the hallways of Thomas Garrett's home to one of several secret rooms, then climbed down a set of stairs to the cellar. Mr. Garrett held a lantern, and Harriet called out, "Kissy, we're coming for you." "Aunt Minty?" cried Kissy, stepping out of the darkness with John right behind. "Mama!" shouted James. He leapt from Rick's arms and ran to his mother, throwing his arms around her. "James!" Kissy sobbed, falling to her knees as her son buried his face in her dress. After a moment, she looked up at Rick, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how it could ever be possible to thank you," she said. Rick stood in the cellar's shadows as Kissy and her Aunt Minty embraced. Kissy recounted their story, telling how they were captured within sight of Federal Hill. The story made Rick shudder, knowing it could have been him. Harriet told of her capture as well. "This reunion almost didn't happen," Harriet Tubman said. She looked at Rick. "We owe a lot to you," she said. She held out her hand, drawing him into their family circle. "And I owe my life to you," Rick said. I feel as though you were family, somehow." He couldn't look at them. Before today, they had been family. But now, as long as Kissy and John remained safe the rest of the way to freedom in Canada, Keziah wouldn't end up in the South again, which is where she'd need to be in order to have the exact child that was Rick's great-great-great-grandfather. She might have more children, different children, but they couldn't be the same. Their lives would be vastly different. Their stories would be foreign to Grandma Phoebe's scrapbook. Grandma Phoebe's scrapbook wouldn't even exist, and neither would she. Rick's bottom lip quivered. Even surrounded by so many people, he felt more alone than ever before. Harriet watched him solemnly, and then she embraced him. "After all you've done for us, you'll be the child I never had," she said in a gruff voice. "There. Now we're family. Got it?" Rick laughed, in spite of his sorrow. "You're totally legit," he said. Chapter 36. A Parting Gift. Thomas Garrett might not have had much furniture left, but his pantry was full enough to feed a small army of historians. Dak was in his element again, surrounded by people who were living history and shaping it. Some of them he knew from history books. Others he didn't. Maybe since they'd exposed the SQ's plot and captured the ringleader, everyone here would now go on to be famous. But that wasn't really the point, Dak thought. They were all fighting to change the course of history. They would accomplish far more together than any of them could hope to accomplish alone. And now Dak and his friends were a part of that too. So were his parents. Somehow, wherever they were, they'd known that he would need their help today, and they'd come through. Maybe everything would turn out okay, despite the odds. He hoped the odds against the abolitionists would be a little bit easier now at least. The SQ was still out there, but with any luck, the abolitionists would take advantage of their second chance and go on to do great things. That was the best thing about history after all, the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of your past. Mistakes like burning off somebody's eyebrows, for instance. Rick was able to find a quiet corner of Mr. Garrett's house, where he pulled out the square. He should have been solving the puzzle to figure out where they would go next, but instead he opened the square's journal, where Dak sometimes recorded the details of their adventures. He started a new file. For a lover of languages, Rick didn't spend a lot of time writing. He didn't tend to tell stories. He didn't really feel he had interesting stories to tell. But he had his Grandma Phoebe's stories. Rick realized that if he disappeared now, if he had uprooted his entire family tree while fixing this break, well, that was a sacrifice he was willing to make if it meant saving everyone else. He couldn't sacrifice his grandma's stories, though. He wanted them to live on. So Rick typed late into the night. He recorded every detail of his family tree as he remembered it, every detail about his grandma and his parents. He hoped that even if he didn't survive what came next, Dak and Sera would be able to keep these stories safe. Sera looked around Thomas Garrett's house. She was a little bit in awe of a man who so humbly refused to take credit for the huge sacrifice he'd made. He'd been forced to pay his last dollar in fines for helping fugitive slaves. He'd had to admit to his own friends and neighbors that, yes, he had helped their slaves escape, and he'd said to them, "Just what are you going to do about it? Kill me? Go ahead." Even after all that, he was more dedicated than ever to his calling and quest. His home was and would always be a safe house. As long as he was alive and had the means to help, he would help. When Sera had a moment alone with him and asked him what he most wanted, his simple reply was,
"Freedom for all."
She wanted to warn him how long it would take, how many obstacles there would be. She wished she could tell him that they had magically fixed everything and tomorrow all would be equal. But she knew that wasn't true. Things were still messed up. Real change took time. Communication is really important, she told him instead. And so is keeping the SQ far away from the Underground Railroad. If you guys all stick together and do what you did today to fight off the SQ, you might just have something big happening here. Thomas Garrett smiled.
"Thank you,"
he said, hand over his heart. And then Sera drew something from her sailor pants pocket and held it up to the lantern light so he could see it. It dangled and glittered, catching the reflection of the jumping flames. She took his bruised wrist and turned it, palm up, and then she set the gold chain in his hand. "This is very, very old," she said. She showed him the tiny stamp with the year 885 engraved on it. "One of the links is broken, but it's still worth a lot." She closed his fingers over it. "You can sell this to keep things going for the abolitionists, okay? You need it a lot more than I do." Thomas Garrett looked at his closed fist, and then he looked at Sera. He knew better than to say no to the Dungeons and More Dungeons master, and so he simply smiled and said, "Thank you." Chapter 37. Safe Passages. Gamaliel Bailey and most of the other abolitionists were eager to get home after their long absences. There was room enough for those who stayed behind to sleep in Thomas Garrett's house. Sera finally got the bath she so desperately wanted, and Dak and Rick each bathed too, at Sera's insistence. Donning her dry Quaker garb once again, she joined the others at dawn to take the chained SQ to jail for endangering and threatening the lives of children and adults alike. Not even the Fugitive Slave Act could protect them after all they'd done. Rick couldn't help but notice that Elsa was taking their defeat especially hard. He'd expected her to resist or make threats, but she remained quiet, almost eerily so. After they'd gotten rid of Elsa and the rest, they all headed to the train station where Harriet Tubman and John Bowley, who had their free papers, accompanied a very large, very fragile crate on a one-way trip to Ontario, Canada. Harriet would be back, she promised. But first, she'd see to it that Kissy and her family made it safely all the way. "It's the most amazing feeling," Harriet said. "Standing in freedom, seeing your free fingers, your free toes, your free everything." She embraced Rick. "Will we ever see you again?" "I don't think so," Rick said. "Well, if you're ever in New York, come by," she said with a shy grin, handing him a piece of paper. "That's where I'm going to build my dream home once this is all over." Rick took the paper and hugged the tiny woman. "Thank you," he said. Dak, Sera, and Rick walked back to Thomas Garrett's house with the man himself and with the real Mrs. Beeson, who would be making the trip back to Cambridge on the same pilot cutter on which Sera and Dak had been passengers. "Tell them all thank you for me," Sera said. "And please give Captain Grunder his pants back." Dak snorted. He poked Rick. "Captain Grunderpants. Get it?" "No." "That book about—" "No." "The two guys in there—" "No." All right already. You guys are so serious all the time." Rick ignored Dak and turned to Mrs. Beeson. "There's something that's been bothering me since we first arrived," he said. "There's a shed near your house. Does it have a trap door in it?" "Thee are a smart lad, I see," Mrs. Beeson said. "Indeed it does. It is one of my hiding places on the farm." "We saw the floor move," he said. I wondered if someone has been hiding there."
"I believe it. Before I was overtaken, I told a fugitive to take a lantern and go there. I'd suspected something, told him it wasn't safe in the house. I'm glad he made it. I'll check it upon my return. Thank thee for the information."
"Leave it to us to run away from an actual safe house and into a trap," Dak said.
"Oh," Sera said. "That reminds me. I apologize for any sticky soda mess you might find in the cellar. It was our only way to escape."
"Have no worries," Mrs. Beeson said with a puzzled smile, surely having no idea what the girl was talking about.
"Your escape was of most importance. I am blessed to have had you in my home, and sorry for the circumstances encompassing it."
Sera held up a hand.
"High five?"
Mrs. Beeson made a fist instead and held it out for the bump.
"Thee are legit,"
she said. Chapter 38. A Glimpse Forward. The three time travelers decided to catch up with one another before going directly to their next mission. They sat in a meadow nearby, the weak December sun warming their shoulders.
"This was a tough break in a different way than we're used to," Sera mused. She looked at Rick. "For you especially, I mean. Do you wish we hadn't come here?"
Rick wrapped his fingers around a piece of long yellow grass and pulled. He chewed on one end of it. "At first, I hated this place, this time period. I still do, but you know what? It was really heartening to see all the abolitionists just being so committed like that, you know?" He paused. "Not just committed to being historians, I mean, but to being, well, so human. It helps put things into perspective." Dak nodded. "It makes me want to be like them with the work that we're doing."
"Me too," Sera said. "I wish we could know what kind of difference they'll make now."
"Didn't you already have a glimpse of the future with old stony-faced Elsa?" Dak asked. "Yeah. Where did you go, anyway?" Rick asked. Sera's face paled. She looked at the ground.
"Nowhere, actually. I programmed the infinity ring to 5 seconds in the future so we'd blip out and back in again. I just wanted to cause a distraction for you guys."
Dak grinned. "Well, in that case, since you didn't waste a trip earlier, maybe we can do it now." Sera bit her lip.
"I don't know, Dak. The infinity ring isn't a toy."
"I think we should," Rick blurted.
"Just this once. I'd like to know how things turned out."
He took a deep breath and blew it out. "If nothing else, I need to know what happened to James." Dak turned to Sera. "You can't say no to that." Sera shrugged.
"Okay, let's go forward a bit and see."
"Yes," said Dak. "Listen, Dak," Rick said. "I already told Sera, but I'm saying this to you too. If anything happens to me when we leave here, just keep going." Dak frowned. "You sound like a funeral. What's up?"
"Is it your remnants?"
Sera asked. Rick nodded.
"Yeah. But I think they'll be over as soon as Kissy makes it to Canada. They just leave me feeling a little strange, I guess. Ignore me."
"I always do," Dak said, and punched Rick in the arm. Rick turned his head slowly and raised an eyebrow. "I've got 30 pounds on you, little bro, and I will kick your butt if I have to. Don't push it." With a sigh, Sera flopped back in the grass and pulled out the infinity ring, just as Thomas Garrett walked up.
"I wanted to say goodbye. It was a delight to know you," he said. "May I ask where you'll go next, or is that a secret?"
"Nah, we can tell you," Dak said. "We're going a few years into the future to see how things turned out."
"Any specifics, Mr. Smith? Mr. Jones?"
Sera asked them, poised to enter coordinates into the ring. Rick perked up. "As a matter of fact," he said, "I do have a place in mind." He pulled the paper from his pocket and handed it to Sera. Harriet Tubman's house in Auburn, New York. Dak nodded. That sounds awesome. Make it like 1875-ish. The Warabibble should be over by then, if you get what I'm saying. He waggled his eyebrows. Pick a day, any day. Rick looked up. How about July 4th? Dak grinned. That's absolutely perfect. Sera started her calculations. Okay, she said when she was finished. They called out a round of goodbyes to Thomas Garrett, and within seconds they were catapulting through time and space. When they opened their eyes, they were standing in a very hot kitchen where a short woman stood on a small stool in front of a stove, stirring stew in a large pot, as if she were expecting guests. Chapter 39. Conductor, Healer, Soldier, Spy. Rick's first thought was, I'm still here. He hadn't been totally sure he would survive the warp. Sera had said once that as long as they were traveling through time, the three of them were anomalies. Being anomalies meant that changes in the time stream wouldn't affect them, no matter how much history changed around them. It was good to know she'd been right about that. Then he realized they were standing smack dab in the middle of Harriet Tubman's kitchen. He flashed Sera a look, knowing their sudden appearance could scare the poor woman. You couldn't land us on the front step? He muttered. She glared and shoved the infinity ring at him. You want to do this? Say the word, smarty pants. Rick sighed. Good point. Sorry. He rapped on the wall lightly and cleared his throat. Harriet Tubman, now in her mid-50s, turned at the noise. She set down her wooden spoon with a bang, and a hand went to her lips. Oh, my stars, she said, her voice as rough as a sailor's. My adopted son has come home. She stepped down from her stool and walked to the time travelers, reaching out to take Rick's hands in her own. Come in and sit. We've been expecting you. We? Asked Dak. He sounded as if he were afraid they'd stepped into another trap. But the young man who came around the corner had a huge smile on his face.
Rick!
He exclaimed in a booming voice. Rick hesitated a moment. It's James, hissed Sera, poking Rick with her elbow. Rick's face broke into a wide smile. Hey, I didn't expect to see you. James gave each of the time travelers a hug as Harriet Tubman watched. Do you have a few minutes? She asked. Rick smiled again. I think we can spare a few. So, Dak began, we last saw you in 1850. Or as I like to remember it, 18-a-bibble, Harriet said. She smiled. Dak grinned back. Nicely played. Hey, does that mean my little phrase caught on? Is everybody saying it now? Harriet shook her head. No, no one is. Oh. Dak glanced at Sera, who just shook her head and laughed. Okay, so what happened after we saw you? Well, Mr. Thomas Garrett immediately let me know I might expect to see you today, Harriet said, eyes merry. So I made a note to remind myself and kept it in my hat all these years. And I just knew James would want to see you too, so I let him know, and he came down from Canada. That's right, James said with a smile. Harriet recounted her trip aboard the train to freedom with Kissy, James, and the baby inside the crate, and Harriet, John, and the other historians causing distractions whenever the baby cried or James couldn't contain his own frustration at being in one more confined space. James was a pistol on that trip, the poor boy, but he's grateful to have taken it, she said. He remembers it well, don't you, dear? Like it happened yesterday, James said. But what I really remember is being sad that you weren't there in Canada. Nobody was able to play the horseback game as well as you. They all tired out too fast, he said with a laugh. I talked about you to anyone who would listen. I called you my best friend.
I'm pretty sure the other kids thought you were imaginary, but Mom always told me I'd see you again."
Rick didn't know what to say. He laughed hard so he could pretend like his misty eyes were from laughter. "I remember it like it was yesterday, too," he said, rubbing his back. "In fact, it was yesterday. I'm still sore." Sera narrowed her eyes at Rick. She tapped her fingers on her knee as he wiped his eyes. He had a feeling she suspected something. She flashed him a sympathetic smile and said to Harriet, "Tell us about the Underground Railroad. Did it continue?" Harriet nodded her head, almost in wonder.
"Yes, the Underground Railroad continued to the utter consternation of the SQ. The harder they worked to stop us, the harder we fought to keep it going. And it grew. Slaves escaped, told their stories, and word got out about the true situation in the South. I went back and forth to personally guide as many slaves as I could to freedom. And, of course, my friend Harriet Beecher Stowe's book really started jaws a-wagging."
"Uncle Tom's Cabin?" Dak guessed.
"That's right. And your friend Gamaliel, God rest his soul, was the first to publish it."
The three time travelers gasped in unison.
"Rest his soul?"
Sera said quietly. Harriet nodded sadly.
"He never lived to see emancipation, but he fought for it until his last breath."
She added,
"Thomas Garrett is gone, too. He'd become such a dear friend, helping hundreds more slaves after you left. It seems he'd received a very, very generous—"
she glanced sidelong at Sera,
"anonymous donation. It kept him in business for years to come."
Sera bit her lip in silent glee. Rick knew she must have had something to do with that, but she only said,
"Oh, how nice."
"Any chance there was a president named Lincoln?" Dak asked.
"Yes, indeed. He was decent, though I had to give him a piece of my mind a time or two about allowing slavery to continue in the South."
She frowned.
"Took us a few years of war to convince him."
"So there was a civil war?" Dak asked. "When did it start?"
"Oh, yes, there was a civil war, 1861 to 1865. It was tough and it was messy, but the abolitionists won in the end."
"Only 4 years?" Dak said. "That's better than 15, but—"
"I know," said Sera. "I was hoping it wouldn't happen at all."
James nodded.
"Everything was demolished. All through that land we traveled from Cambridge on north and all over the country. Aunt Minty was in the middle of it all. As a conductor for the Underground Railroad for 8 years, she made over a dozen trips into slave territory to rescue fugitives. She was a nurse for the injured, a recruiter of over 500 slaves to be soldiers for the North, and even a Union spy."
Harriet only smiled. "Wow, a spy?" Rick said with a grin. "My Grandma Phoebe would be—" He stopped abruptly and took in a sharp breath. Then he stood up and walked to the window. "Never mind. I'm sorry." Harriet and James shared a quiet look, and then James got up and followed Rick to the window, while Harriet ushered Dak and Sera to the kitchen for some stew. At the window, James put his hand on Rick's shoulder. "We really are related, aren't we?" Rick leaned forward, gripping his head in his hands. He swallowed hard, and then he shook his head. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know anything anymore." They stood in silence for a long moment. "Thank you for saving my life," James whispered. "I grew up free and happy because of you. No matter what, you will always be my brother." All Rick could do was nod. "Thanks," he choked out. "That means more than you know." After a moment, Rick wiped his face with his hands, took a deep breath, and smiled. He and James walked into the kitchen and sat with Sera and Dak in front of steaming bowls of stew. He could feel Sera's eyes on him.
Whatever happened to Elsa? Dak asked. Harriet frowned.
She disappeared after you did, she said. People said she'd gone insane, but every now and then I get a strange feeling coming over me, like she's got me in her crosshairs. Like if I turned my head an inch more, I'd see her wild red hair disappearing around a corner.
Harriet tapped her lips thoughtfully.
The woman clearly made an impression on me, but that's all in my imagination, I'm sure.
The SQ has eyes and ears everywhere, Sera said, remembering what Brint and Mari had told them. You've done so much to weaken them. I'm sure they're tracking you, and I'm sure they're really mad. Be careful, Ms. Tubman. Harriet only laughed.
The SQ ain't never caught me yet.
When Rick and the others rose to leave, James and Harriet embraced them all, one by one.
You were an inspiration to us all in a dark, dark time. Not just for black folks' rights, but for women's rights, too. Whatever you said to my friend Susan B. Anthony really got her going. Thank you for your service to the historians,
Harriet said.
And for your great sacrifices.
She gave Rick a look that could only come from a battered hero like Harriet.
Whatever they may be.
Sera led Dak and Rick out of Harriet Tubman's home the traditional way, through the front door, to catch one more glimpse of the 19th century, while Rick used the square, working out the puzzle for the next break.
You know what would be fun? Sera said as they strolled along. Going to some tropical island with lots of food and soap and toothbrushes, where the break could only be fixed by us taking a vacation.
Boring, Dak said. I want to go back to Paris.
What? Not the Vikings again? No, not 885. Late 1700s kind of Paris.
Rick tuned in as he worked the square. Why there? Sera laughed.
I know why, she said. He wants to get another bottle of soda. So what? I'm a collector.
Rick shook his head and turned back to the square. Well, he said, you may get your island getaway, Sera.
Sera gasped. Really? Are you serious? Where? Tahiti? Barbados? Canary Islands? New Zealand? Tell me.
She gripped his arm.
Come on.
Rick flashed a grin.
So very close.
How about this? Ready? Are you sitting down? Sera shook his arm.
Of course not. We're walking, dog breath.
Well? Dak asked, impatient. Okay, Rick said. Picture this. Gorgeous sunrise over the water on a steamy...
Just tell me, Sera said. Oh, I can feel the sand between my toes now.
That's probably just silt in your socks from the Chesapeake Bay, Dak remarked. Rick's eyes danced for the first time in days. Okay. We're going to Japan. Not exactly tropical, but it's an island, and there will be samurai, and maybe ninjas. The clue's a little unclear on that point. Sera's jaw dropped. Dak's did too, and then he grinned and pumped the air with his fist.
Yes!
Oi, Sera said, shaking her head.
I hate my life right now, I really do. That was pretty stinking mean, Rick.
You're just so fun to tease, Rick said. They rounded the corner, where a stately farmhouse stood, a large cornfield behind it. This time the stalks were vibrant green and only knee-high. Sera reluctantly pulled out the infinity ring and began to program the year and the location coordinates. Don't forget to factor in Groundhog Day, Dak deadpanned. Groundhog Day. The term made Sera's stomach clench when she realized what Dak was referring to. Her time warp with Elsa. Sera hadn't told them the truth about that. And the truth was, she'd made a horrible mistake with her calculations. She'd seen the cataclysm with her own eyes. Get a grip, Frost, she told herself, determined not to let the stress show. She couldn't bring herself to tell Dak or Rick what she had witnessed. She would just have to be strong enough to carry that particular burden alone. As she finished the last few calculations, the door of the farmhouse burst open, and a towering, chiseled-faced woman with white hair and red undertones came charging out at them. The 3 time travelers looked at one another wearily.
"And our lives would just not be complete without a visit from Elsa,"
Sera muttered. "Man, Mr. Garrett could not keep a secret," Dak said.
"She does look a little crazy,"
Rick added. "I think I know why," Sera thought, but she kept it to herself.
"Grab hold, boys. We're 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and
Gone. This is Dion Graham. We hope that you have enjoyed this production of Infinity Ring, Book 3, The Trap Door, by Lisa McMann. This program was produced and directed by Scott Sherritt. Executive producer Paul R. Gagney. Original music by Susan Jane. Run, Mourner, Run, sung by Christina LaRocca. Recorded by Alex Ryder. Post-production by John Van Horn. Text and production copyright 2013 by Scholastic Inc. All rights reserved.